Hello there, today I'm going to be talking about 20 classics that I intend to read in the 2020s. I saw this book tag on Bookish Princess's channel, which I'll leave down below in the description. And when I saw it, I was drawn to the idea straight away because I want to read a lot of classics, but I don't want to put a limit that makes me feel like constrained. Like I'm generally bad at commitment, typical man, right? When it comes to books especially, like I guess I get nervous about telling myself I'm going to do this in a set time, and then if I don't do it, I'm a failure, and then there's the pressure to read, and then reading's not fun. So for me, a decade is perfect because I'm pretty sure I can read 20 books in 10 years. It should be manageable, even for a slow reader like myself. And even if I don't do it, then it's fine because I've got who's going to be there to judge me, right? Like in 10 years, the world will have been destroyed by the climate crisis. So yay, I'll be fine. I'll be off the hook. The first 10 are going to be books that are on my shelf. And then the next 10 are going to be sort of more hypothetical, just things that I really, really want to read as soon as I can. So book number 1 is Moby Dick. You can see I have a little bookmark there. I have been reading it ever since I borrowed it from my cousin just before I came to Japan, which has been about 6 years now. So yeah, it's taken me a while. Like Moby Dick, the book, has kind of become Moby Dick the whale. And like, what am I saying? The book is like the whale. The book to me is like what the whale is to Ahab, as in like it's my challenge, the thing I have to overcome and defeat, and I will one day defeat this book. I don't want to give the wrong impression though. Like I actually adore what I've read so far. It's just really difficult to read sometimes stuff that's so old. Like I think it's from the 1700s. So yeah, the language is tricky sometimes, but I adore what it is. It just sort of takes a lot out of my brain. This will be the year, maybe. This will be the year that I finally defeat my white whale. Number 2 is, I don't know if you can see that. I hope you can. It's Unnatural Selection. A selection. So a selection of the actual novel. It's not as big as the actual Darwin, you can see. And as you can see, the title here is Chinese and then English. And the first half is Chinese and the second half is the English translation. So I'm not studying Chinese or anything like that. It's just that I was in China for a spell and I was stuck in the same place for a while, and there was a bookshop and it only had a few dual language books that had English in them, and this was one of the cheaper ones. And also, like, I've always been interested in the origin of species and Darwin, and I've read stuff about Darwin, and the theories are just like really fascinating and inspiring for me. Just the general kind of idea of life as something which, in order to exist, it has to sort of diversify, and its sort of main force is to find change and ways of changing itself. Like I know it's science, but just sort of conceptually and almost spiritually, like it's always been something which I find really amazing. And also like the way that different species like are connected to each other. Like I've read already a little bit of this and it was really great, so I'm excited to read the rest of it. Next one is Japanese Poetic Diaries. So I think most people have heard of haiku. This is a different form called haibun, which is basically like prose, and then like prose broken up with bits of poetry and in a diary format. So you'll have like a few paragraphs of someone describing their day, and then some specific detail that they noticed will be written in a poetic meter. And I love it. I adore this form. It's something that not enough people know about. The thing that stuck me with this was one called The Diary of Izumi Shikibu, which, even though I love the form, I just found it really dull. And like some poems were great and some moments were great, but it was just not that accessible. And it was written, I don't know when it was written, in the Heian period. So like thousands, 2,000 years ago or something. It was, I don't know, it was just really hard to get into. Not 2,000 years ago. Anyway, it was really hard to get into. And I want to get back into it and read it. I really want to read the last one in this as well, which is only a few pages long, by Shiki Masaoka. This guy, I read a little bit about him. He sounds really cool. He kind of reinvented the haiku form and like for the Meiji period. So he brought like the Japanese traditional poetic forms into the modern age. Shiki apparently is the name of a Japanese cuckoo which was supposed to make the sound as though while it was singing it was also coughing up blood, which is a lovely image. But yeah, Shiki got tuberculosis. He was like, right, that's my pen name. From now on I want to be known as blood cuckoo. The idea of, like I'm a poet, and as I sing, I'm also coughing up blood. It's kind of metal. So I've got a lot of respect for him, and I really want to read that too. Next we have Slaughterhouse-Five. Can you read that? It kind of covers Slaughterhouse-Five. So, yeah, I don't know where this book came from. It's kind of like a mystery to me. Like, it was just there on my shelf one day. I seriously, don't remember buying it or being given it by anyone. If you know how I got this book, if you gave me this book, I'm sorry, just please reveal yourself. It feels like one of those things where you go out with the lads, get absolutely hammered. The next day you wake up, there's a strange book on your shelf. I just opened to a random page, and it says, everything was beautiful and nothing hurt. So that gives me incentive to read it right here, right now. Number 5 is Speak Memory, the autobiography of Vladimir Nabokov. Now, I'm not normally one for non-fiction, but because it's Vladimir Nabokov, then I'll just read anything that he's done. I've read Lolita and Pale Fire, and I adored them. And apparently, if you go by the blurby critic things that they write here and other stuff that was written when it came out, then this is meant to be an incredibly good autobiography. Yeah, it's not normally that an autobiography is counted as a classic, so I guess that's why this one's sort of special. Number 6 is Demons, the Dostoevsky book. It's an absolute tome. It's a real, what they call a doorstopper. You could do a lot of functional things with a book like this. It could be a support for furniture, and I don't know. Dostoevsky will always have a special place in my heart. I adore his writing, and his characters are just so bitter and self-righteous and lost. You just kind of want to give them a hug. Well, you don't want to give them a hug if they're murdering old women and stuff like that. That's not cool. Number 7, The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. I had to look at it to read it because it's quite a mouthful. I've actually had to get this for my university course, and then they pulled it off the syllabus, so I never read it. It's a really short little gothic novel, and because it's a gothic novel, I was always excited about reading it and thought, yeah, I'll just carry this around until I do read it one day. And yeah, I read about it on Wiki, and it's interesting because it seems that it was the writer James Hogg was super popular, really acclaimed when he was alive, and then and one of the reasons was because he came from a poor background. It was like a success story, I think, from rags to riches kind of thing, at least literary riches. I don't know if he got a lot of wealth afterwards or not, but point is that after he died, he completely fell out of favor, and everyone was like, yeah, no, that was shit. And that apparently was the case for about 100 years or something. And then only in the 1900s, he got rediscovered and reprinted, and now especially this book is seen as a really important classic, which says a lot about Scottish national identity at the time. He's Scottish. I think I didn't say. He's Scottish, right? And that just was fascinating for me because, the whole idea of a classic is kind of contentious because I guess we think of it as something which has stood the test of time normally, and yet something like this, didn't, because it was popular and then not popular, and now it's seen as a classic only recently. So yeah, I find that fascinating. Fun fact, James Hogg is also the ancestor of Alice Munro, a contemporary fiction writer now. So once I read this, I definitely want to read some of her stuff to see if some literary magic is passed on through genetics. Number 8 is Los Premios, or in English, The Winners, but I think it's actually The Prizes, Los Premios, but anyway, it's always translated as The Winners, by Julio Cortázar. I got this book in Peru. My Spanish is not good enough that I can read a novel in Spanish, sadly. So that's a goal for me, that, in 10 years, I want to be able to read a full novel in Spanish. I got this deliberately to kind of stimulate myself and give myself the insensitive. I'm not insensitive. To give myself the incentive to read Cortázar in his native tongue. Not just a short story. I've read short stories, but a full novel. This is his first novel, and he's one of my all-time favorite writers. The premise is there's a bunch of people, they win a lottery, and then the lottery is that they all get to take a cruise somewhere, but they don't know where. So there's a bunch of strangers on a boat. And I love bunch of strangers on a boat stories, like that whole setup, the premise of having a bunch of people from different walks of life all together in some confined space and having to interact. It doesn't have to be a boat. It could be, like just people in a train carriage or in an elevator that's stuck. Something that means like people who had their own little stories suddenly have to talk to each other, and like just, I guess, like an excuse to trap a lot of people together. I don't know why, but I've always loved that setup. So yeah, looking forward to this one when I can speak Spanish. Number 9 is the Anthology of Chinese Literature, a very thoughtful present I received once, and specifically the Book of Songs, which takes up the first little chunk of this. Originally, they thought it was compiled by Confucius, and now I think the consensus is that Confucius really didn't have anything to do with it. But it is a key text in Confucianism, and so like had a huge influence on Chinese literature and language and culture, and apparently even today certain phrases from the Book of Songs are used as in normal language. Easily the oldest thing I have here. I think it's like 600 BC, so should be an interesting challenge. And number 10 is Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry, and I don't know much about this one. It was also a gift. Apparently it's about a British guy in a Mexican town on the Day of the Dead, being drunk and at the foot of a big volcano. That sort of sounds like Diary of a White Guy on his gap year, but apparently it's more like this modernist exploration of alcoholism and how this guy's mind disintegrates. So that's nice. Okay, so that was the first 10. Now we are on to the not on my shelf section. So for number 11, I want to say all of the Greek tragedies. At least all the ones I haven't read yet. And I know that sounds like kind of cheating because I'm doing more than one in one place, but they're not so long, and also like I've already read quite a few. There's 32 in total, and I think I've read like 8 or 9. There's such a wealth of knowledge and like ways of thinking about myths, and I'm really into the myths. I just would love to be able to have all of those under my belt. It would be a cool thing to say as well, wouldn't it? Like, yeah, I've read every Greek tragedy ever. Well, of the ones that are available to read. Number 12 has to be something by Jane Austen, so I guess Pride and Prejudice, because that's the one that people always say you gotta read. My number 1, I think, shameful thing when it comes to books is not having read any Austen. And I don't feel normally that like anyone should ever feel like ashamed or like kind of bad about not having read a certain author or a certain book, because there's just too many of them and there's too many good ones, and there's all this sort of like canonical shit that we're supposed to see as what you need to read if you're into literature or whatever. But I do feel bad about Austen. Like, she's the one writer who I feel like I don't know why, I feel like she just passed me by when I was like growing up. Pride and Prejudice is the one they say you should go for, but I kind of feel more attracted to Northanger Abbey because I know that it's a parody of Gothic novels, and I really like, and I've read a lot of Gothic novels. So maybe Northanger Abbey instead, or maybe both. Why not? I have a full decade. Why not both? Number 13 is something by James Joyce, and so it's got to be Ulysses. Now with Ulysses, it's kind of a funny one for me because, how do I say this? So like my dad, who's Irish, has always been trying to get me to read Joyce. I remember there was even this one Christmas where the present that he gave me was a book which was like how to read Joyce, or like, I don't know, themes in Joyce or something. So it's like, yeah, a very subtle hint, Dad. I've managed to avoid him so far, and although I want to read him, definitely, it's not the same as with Austen because like, I've got that kind of dad pressure. So I don't know, it's like once I read Joyce, I know it'll be the end of any sliver of adolescence I still have in me, like not reading Joyce is the last I have of rebelling against my father, and I don't really want to let that go. Even though it's like Ulysses and Greek myth, and it seems like it's my kind of thing, I can read him like in the later half of the 2020s, like I don't have to rush. I'll get to it, but I don't have to rush, Number 14 is Nostromo by Joseph Conrad. Now I could say with this one that I've never read anything by Conrad, and so I want to read something that's not Heart of Darkness, but a little bit more off the beaten jungle track. Or I could say even that when it comes to Conrad, like I know that he inspired Edward Said, who's the guy who kind of invented post-colonialism and wrote this book Orientalism, which I adore and which has really been influential in so many different facets of life, not just my life, but like now we're always using his theories to think about things like ethnicity and race and geopolitics and all that. And like I wanted to see the fictional link when it comes to Joseph Conrad and all this stuff, but it's alien. Yeah, Nostromo is the name of the spaceship in Alien, and I like Alien, so I want to read Nostromo. That is my main base reason. I really like Alien, and I want to be that Alien fan who can say like, oh yeah, it's a great movie, I love the cinematography, but have you read the novel that the spaceship's name is based off of? Number 15 is something by Mario Vargas Llosa. I'm not sure what his most famous book is, or like what's a good one to break into, so I'll put like one of his most famous books here. He's a Peruvian writer and he won the Nobel Prize, so I should read him. I haven't read any Peruvian writer apart from Cesar Vallejo, who I like, and I'm half Peruvian. If Ulysses is like my father book, then I guess Mario Vargas Llosa is going to be like my mother book. Although my mother's not pressuring me to read it or anything. That's just me. That's just me wanting to, get in touch with my culture and read some of its books. Number 16 is Beloved by Toni Morrison. Now, Beloved was written in 1987, so that's really pushing it, I think, to count like what a classic is. Even though it's arbitrary, I guess, it's definitely the youngest book on this list. I've never read anything by Toni Morrison, and I know it's got a kind of ghost story-ish thing going on in it. So that's all I know about it, apart from like it's to do with slavery, I think. But yeah, I really want to read it, so it's going on this list. If I class a book which is only a little older than I am as a classic work of literature, does that mean that I'm old enough to be a classic work of literature? Next book is Middlemarch by George Eliot. I read one book by George Eliot in high school, Silas Marner, I think it's called, and I really didn't like it, and I think it was to do with it being a high school book and how it was taught, and maybe it's just not a good book for high school, I don't know, but I don't remember it very well, and I want to give George Eliot another shot, and this is like her main thing. I guess I'm also like interested, just like the fact that she's a woman called George is like seeing it with modern eyes. It seems really badass and cool and queer. So, more interesting than J.K. Rowling, anyways. Like J.K. Rowling, like she didn't actually change her name. It's like it's still a woman's name. But George Eliot, it's like damn, she went all the way there. She like went straight full on George. So that's pretty cool. I think it's pretty hardcore. Also, like when I started, the first BookTube videos that I ever saw were by insert literary pun here, which I'll link to somewhere down there. And she like talked a lot about George Eliot. I think it's George Eliot's one of her favorite writers, if not her favorite writer. So that was also kind of inspiring and made me want to dive into that writer. Number 18 is The Golden Pavilion by Mishima Yukio. Now this is a story about a guy who, I think he's a priest, but anyway, like he loves this Golden Pavilion, which is a temple, Kinkakuji in Kyoto, and he adores it so much, and he's so like in awe of its grandeur and its beauty and its architecture and its religious symbology, whatever. He's just so into it that he feels he needs to burn it to the ground. So that's what he does, and that's like the premise. That's all I know about the story. But it's a good premise, right? Like, that premise is exactly what I expect from Mishima Yukio, who I feel like is one of my favorite writers, even though I've only read a novella and a short story by him. That passion for something, that destructive passion for something, is something which I like. He writes so well. And this is meant to be one of his main books, and I've been to Kinkakuji as well, so that's just exciting, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. Number 19 is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Now, I've seen the Alfred Hitchcock film, and I adore it, and I've also seen the Hitchcock film of The Birds, which she also wrote originally, but The Birds is a short story, I think, or a novella, I'm not sure, but anyway, I'm not including it. But Rebecca's a novel, so that's going on here. From Hitchcock's movies, my image is that Daphne du Maurier writes these atmospheric, creepy stories that seem to be right up my alley. Rebecca, for those who don't know, is a story of a woman who gets married and then is kind of haunted by the ghost of her husband's ex-wife, although it's not a supernatural haunting, it's just that she feels her presence everywhere and in everything. So the servants are talking about her husband's talking about her, the narrator herself is talking to herself about her, and also you never find out the narrator's name, you only ever know the name Rebecca, so it's just like Rebecca, Rebecca, Rebecca. Like a psychological ghost story, which sounds great, sounds exactly like what I need. And finally, number 20 is Passing by Nella Larsen. I first found out about this book when I read an essay by Judith Butler for a school like a while ago. The concept of passing I'd known about for ages, and it's like really important, I guess, to me and my life and my research. I always thought that passing was something that came from the queer community and was a kind of modern term. But in fact, this book was written in 1929, so it's way earlier, and it comes from the African American experience of people who are mixed race and passing as white. And so that's what the premise of this novel is. I think there's two, I don't know if they're sisters, but like two women, and one of them passes and one doesn't. And like the plot revolves around their experiences of being able to pass. The concept of passing is basically when one person is viewed as belonging to an identity group just based on their physical appearance. So for example, if someone goes out in the street and they're recognized by society as being like a girl and white, then that person is passing as being a girl and white. So it's not to do with your intentions or what you think of yourself, it's just to do with how you are perceived and treated by a society. So this concept was really useful for me to conceptualize things, not just to do with identity issues, but also to do with like Marxism, because of this writer Gramsci, who writes about cultural hegemony. But even though it's not his concept, the idea of passing helped me understand Marxism, basically, is what I'm trying to say here in a roundabout way. Anyway, passing is a key concept in my life. I just really want to get there and read it and, learn stuff. And also, if going by what Butler says, the story sounds pretty ace as well. So I'm just really excited for this one. That's it. We finished. Those are 20 books that I want to read in the next decade. I think I can do it. I think I can do it like much sooner than the end of the decade. Maybe I'll read a bunch of them this year. Who knows? I'm definitely going to try my best. And just like going over them has made me excited to start getting into that pile. I really enjoyed making this. I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you have any recommendations about things I should add to this list, or if you are interested in any of the books, or you think that I should avoid one of these books for some special reason, then please let me know. Comment in the comments, and I'll see you another time. Bye bye.